We're going to talk Space ISSO, Information Systems Security Officer. There's the abstract if you wanted to read it. I represent Code Talkers Engineering. On this project, I was partnered with the Space ISAC. If you're not familiar with them, they're information sharing something consortium analysis, maybe? And then Purdue University's CyberTap. And so this was a DARPA research project. And basically, they funded us to do skill gap research. So they were looking at, hey, we got a lot of cyber jobs that are open. How do we close that skill gap and kind of get some training pipelines going? So I'm Jordan. I'm working on a PhD in cybersecurity. You know, I invented a card game called Cyber Attack. So if you ever want to play it, it's really fun. I did bring some. I do sell them for $40. There's my sales pitch. I have a CISSP. I got that because I got tired of cyber people telling me no. Hey, I want to do this. No. Hey, I want to do this. No.
Yeah,
you know, it's so bad. So month of self-study, got it, and then it was no, and I was like, you know, I'm qualified for your job, right? And so the conversation changed. Here I am. I also ran for president of the United States in 2020. And so for the rest of my life, you may address me if you would like as former presidential candidate.
Guess that didn't work either.
Or did it? All right, so this was a research project. So the research questions I had was, how effective is an agile gamified framework in developing a space ISO competencies? There's a lot of different problems in the ISO world, right? So a lot of people have different definitions of what an ISO is, but also the space world now adds another layer of complexity. And so really, I have another thing called the inverted security risk taxonomy, you'll see. And then I use knowledge, skills, and tasks. So I call them KSTs. NIST, NICE calls them TKSs. Everybody else in the world calls them KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. So I went with KSTs because I only changed one letter instead of just mixing them up. You're welcome. So a Space Information Systems Security Officer is an individual assigned responsibility for maintaining the appropriate operational security posture for a space blank, blank, blank. So that could be spacecraft mission packages, ground station, data links, launch systems, supporting infrastructure, information system or program. Could be an enclave. They're responsible for ensuring the CIA of the system, as well as implementing and enforcing the security policies and procedures. So ISO is a pretty interesting role because it's not a very senior position, but yet with that duty description, they actually have a lot of authority and a lot of responsibility. And so it's important as an ISO to kind of understand that they have the ability to tell people no if they need to. They also have the ability to tell people yes, right? And so an ISO in a junior position may have to tell senior executives yes or no. And we have to make sure that ISOs know that. All right, so why is it important? Well, there's protection of critical infrastructure, right? So I think in the past 2 days, we've heard a lot of that. There's complex involving threat landscape, obviously. Compliance, I think, is going to be the biggest. So as the space industry is growing, we have this thing called CMMC, like on the horizon, that's going to hit the space industry. And so with that, all of the space industry is going to need ISOs. And today, not all of them have them. Then there's the risk management, which is just good process. Incident response and recovery, obviously, the more IT infrastructure that's going into the satellites and the launch systems and the ground stations and all of that, the more incident response is involved. The interdisciplinary knowledge, so cyber is essentially a 20-year career. Space is a 20-year career. Now we're talking somebody who has to do a 40-year career in a matter of like 5 to 10 years, right? So, like, is that possible? And then innovation and technology keeps changing. So even if you're really good today, cool, new technology came out tomorrow. Good luck, right? Constant evolution. And so we use the NICE workforce framework, and it's just a standard approach in common language. Is anyone here not familiar with it? Everyone knows NICE? Be nice. Basically, they have work roles, those TKS statements, which I call KSTs, because I think they messed up on that. But there's like 2,000 of them. And if you read those 2,000 statements are not inclusive of everything cyber, right? They're a pretty good broad collection, but they're not inclusive. And then they have the competencies areas. And they've actually done a lot of work. They've gone from version like 0.1 to 1, and I think they just released 2 in March. But basically, you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that everybody's familiar with. NICE likes to use tasks, and when you have a job-focused perspective, that makes sense because the job is the tasks, right? I spell skills with a Z to make it sound cool, like those 90s commercials, right? Extreme, like, you know, yeah. So anyways, the map works to, everything maps to the work roles, and then within there is the competencies. It's kind of weird how they organize it, but it kind of makes sense. And then the key is to really find the value in what everything that they're doing is, because nobody actually uses it yet. So, you know, there's that. But within NICE, they've defined these work roles. So you have this original gangster one, OG, right? OG WRL 014. So the 14th one they created was System Security Management, which is responsible for managing the cybersecurity of a system or enclave, which is ISSO. It's the definition I just gave you earlier. ISSOs often will be tasked with other work roles and have to know them. So there's dozens of work roles, but the ISSO may also have to do somebody else's. So what's interesting here is 2,000 tasks, dozens of work roles. Where do you fit? Where are your skills? Where's your team and your organization's skill set missing in the event that you need to have something, right? So we did this class last year, and in March they released version 2, and they added a whole bunch of OT, operational technology. So here's some examples, right? So 1288, knowledge of OT cybersecurity compliance requirements and best practices. Like task 2031, identify gaps in OT network architecture. So I mean, there's a lot. You can spend tons of time digging into these. And KST management really requires community involvement. So NICE went together and put a whole bunch of lists, put a list out. Who are they? Why do you care, right? If I create a list, I can do that too. Does it matter? Does it matter more or less? Because I did, but I don't think my list is great. But ultimately, it's the community. So really, if we have this big list, how are we using it? How do we as a community maintain it? Otherwise, it's not really worth that much. So here's the Agile Cybersecurity Training Loop. So basically, I have an inner loop, which is what you know and what you can actually do. So we have your raw skills, which is reading, writing, arithmetic, typing, maybe basic cyber, basic computing. We have job skills, cyber skills, and then certifications. I think those fall into your inner loop. The middle loop is how do you learn best as an individual or a team? So right now the industry is all about the web-based training. Watch these videos, pass this test. It's horrible, right? It's awful. Especially in this generation of autism and ADHD. It's not gonna work. So we gotta change it. But with immersion training, we can actually close that skill gap. With memorization, we can actually get pretty far with that base knowledge. Micro learning, that's kind of fun. Instead of like advertising on your phone, what if I hijacked the advertising on your phone and got rid of the stupid ads and gave you like mini cybersecurity trainings? It'd be like way better. Just like dead scrolling on whatever social media and like, oh, hey, now I passed Security Plus. Whoa, that was weird. But ultimately, reinforcement gamification, right? Like, let's add some concepts here into your life and actually do some learning. Then the outer loop is the so what? What's the point? And that's really based on the economy, right? So I went to school and I had to learn trigonometry instead of doing my taxes. Tax season a couple months ago, that was, I mean, have you done taxes? Like, it gets pretty crazy, especially the further you get in your career. I would rather have learned taxes. However, at some point I had to learn calculus. In order to learn that, probably needed to learn trigonometry, right? So there's a projection, a career projection that you really have to kind of uncover. And without having that map and that dream and that goal kind of identified, what's the point of the learning that you're doing, right? So I remember when I took CISSP, at one point, I think there was like a token ring architecture question in the exam. Can anyone show me a network they've seen in the last 20 years with that? LTRS. They talked on Tuesday. Space systems, right? But it's rare. But they do exist. So you got old stuff, you got new stuff. So here's my inverted security risk taxonomy. And this is interesting. This is based on, we spent a lot of time doing things that are the most likely, as opposed to doing things that are the most impactful. And so what that means is, the cyber attack that's gonna happen most often is a denial of service because you forgot your password. Right? Statistically, somebody in here is gonna, especially after a long week away from the office, you forgot a password and you're gonna be locked out of something at least 15 minutes trying to recover into it. That is more likely than some nation state actor coming into your system and destroying it. However, the most impactful would be destroying your system. And how many times a year do you practice rebuilding it from the ground up? None. Right? So this is kind of fun. So it's the inverse of the Bloom's taxonomy, which is on the right there. So in Bloom's, they spend a lot of their time doing the remember and the understanding and working their way up. And the harder stuff in security is what we really should be spending our time in. And I liken this to church security. When you have an active shooter and you have to shoot somebody in the head 25 feet away, 25 yards away, that's hard to do. You can't do that without practice, without dedicating time on a range, right? You got stress, your stress and risk meter is like way off the chart. You're running on just adrenaline, like your brain doesn't even work at that point. Whereas you could put a Band-Aid on drunk, like drunk people could do that. So why do you spend all of your time practicing putting on Band-Aids when you could be practicing at the range taking that 25-yard shot? Right? So apply that to cybersecurity or any security model. And this is hard to do because there's an ROI perspective, there's a business case perspective, there's layers of complexity in calculating that impact and calculating that likelihood. And you won't really see how people are doing those calculations in risk management today, which is interesting as well. We definitely do a lot of paperwork though, right? Nobody reads it. Like there's hundreds of pages of manuals in cyber compliance. Nobody reads it, nobody cares. Nobody. So, all right, so gamification, we use gamification. The picture on the left was a picture of games that everybody brought in. The bottle of whiskey helps. We use Cribble EDU as the base gamifying space trainer in our class. Hack the Box for the cyber modules that they have. Hack the Box actually maps to NICE. So if you go into their environment, they actually have some of their modules mapped to NICE in the KSDs. And then, we got the threat is real, don't let Jeff down. So that's how to not do gamification, by the way. Just because it's got a little score and you get a little trophy at the end, that's not gamification, right? And we played backdoors and breaches in the class. So if you're not playing games, you're probably not really having a good time. And like I encourage gaming, right? Gamification. One, it brings joy. Joy is something that's absent in a lot of environments, within your work teams, within your training environments. And so joy is helpful, just like vitamin D. Go get some sunlight and play some games. All right, so how do we do it? We start off with looking at what ISSO is, and really it's a base layer of cyber IT and soft skills. And I heard that the soft skill talk yesterday only had like 5 people show up. And I think more people need soft skills, for sure. But ISSO is an intermediate position, so it's not entry level. There are entry level ISSOs, there are senior ISSOs, but generally it's intermediate. A lot of people have different definitions of ISSOs. I did a bunch of interviews, everybody had different answers, but really CNSS 4014 has a pretty good definition, which is where we shaped that earlier space ISSO definition. And then really it's the compliance framework or the requirements framework that kind of drives what the actual ISSO is going to be doing in that system or that environment. With that, for a space ISSO, really we got to teach them some space stuff. So we create this space overlay. And then with that, we have IoT and OT overlays because everything in space is a little wonky, right? So you can't just learn normal cyber or normal IT. And then you get space ISSO. So the job description, if you look at a job description, you try to map it, you'll see things like assist the ISSO with incident response actions. So when you look at NICE, you're like, oh, that's easy. That's KO 724, knowledge of incident response principles and practices. That will help me do that. And then like conducts independent comprehensive management, operational and technical security control assessments. Oh, that's task 1246, establish security assessment and authorization processes. Right, so you can kind of do this mapping. It's not perfect. Some of these will be one to many, many to one. Some of these won't map. So an example of that is good written interpersonal skills. It's not nice. Another one is manage security-related changes to information systems and assesses the security impact of those changes. That's configuration management and change management. It's not nice. This engineering process, right? So when you look at those things that aren't in there and you look at a job rec, you're probably about 50% of the tasks are gonna be a nice and half of them are not. But how do you actually learn interpersonal skills? Right, I talked soft skills, only 5 people went to the class yesterday, so might be a problem. So for space ISSO, we looked at, okay, well cyber, there's 2,000 of these, we can use that. There's others that are missing. Space, so we made them up. Like I used AI, I'm not gonna lie, I cheated, put a whole bunch of data into AI and said, hey, give me these. And it will lie to you. Like you have to be careful. It would be like, oh yeah, this totally works. And I was like, no, it doesn't. And it was like, you're right, I'm sorry. But ultimately, once you get it working, it's not that bad. But so for space, it'd be like familiarity with space situational awareness principles, right? Or TT&C security, system security hardening. For soft skills, things like knowledge of persuasion techniques. Cool, right? And that sounds fun. Diplomacy, I think there's a game with that. ICS, a whole bunch of them. We did systems engineering, we did agile development, and we tried to do intelligence operations too. So we created, I want to say about 1,000 additional KSTs in addition to the 2,000 cyber ones. So now we're looking at 3,000, and it's not inclusive, right? So if you come up with a job rec that didn't have one, you got to kind of create your own. But ultimately, everything kind of flows around, right? So what we're looking for is this framework right here. And in the bottom right, we have these levels. So we'll start with the entry level. That's the guy who doesn't know anything. They know a little, they want to learn, they're going to soak stuff up. Then we have the mission level. They know stuff, right? But they really have a job to do. They have a mission to accomplish. They don't really want to know everything. They don't have time. They really want to know what they need to know to get the thing done. Then you have the privilege level, and that's the guy with maybe admin credentials, or he knows somebody, right? And he just kind of, is in a position of privilege. And so that privilege is actually a risk. So they need to know how not to break things or how not to cause danger, in addition to the things that they need to know. And then the hero level, this is the guy I think does 90% of the work. You'll hear the thing, 10% of the people do, I think that's him, the hero. He just knows everything, does everything, right? Don't get in his way. Like he needs to do the work. Actually, he does help him. He doesn't need to do the work. You need to do the work. But he needs the right access and the right support, which means the process and the organization needs to be in place to support that guy, that person, not just kind of get in the way. Does that make sense? So if you have a security measure in place that hinders him because nobody else is really doing the work, get rid of that security measure and figure something else out. It's kind of what I'm saying. All right, so that goes into some sort of web-based trainer. For this case, I used Moodle. It's very affordable, very open source. And then with Moodle, you can kind of do record management, kind of have management oversight. And that's where I could feed in the nice framework with competencies. I could add in my own overlays. And then that feeds up into a whole bunch of training options. So I use Kerbal EDU, I use Hack the Box. I tried to play with a little AI and ML support there. Didn't get that far in it. But it kind of highlighted something. The creator level. There's all these creative people out there, and it essentially creates a best of breed training world, training ecosystem. If one person was to create all of the training, it would not be maintained very well, right? It would become boring and stale. Whereas if anybody can create modules and puzzles and challenges and opportunities to learn, it now becomes best of breed. So you start competing for who enjoyed what training the most. And I love that with Capture the Flags, because people just release their Capture the Flags and people just eat them up, and then you see reviews, and like that is the kind of model that works well with this, as opposed to, well, I made this web-based training in 1998 and it's still getting views, right? I think that's fine, but it's not gonna work, right? It might work for some people, it won't work for everybody. And we all have different learning styles. So just because there's one like module on one KST in one learning style doesn't mean there can't be another one in a completely different way. Like somebody wants an audiobook on this, somebody wants a video on this, somebody wants just a game on this, right? When you create a best of breed gaming environment or module kind of opportunity, it creates an interesting little pipeline that, individuals can kind of optimize their own learning path. So for this class, we've had 3 weeks of training, which is a lot. So we figured out that that doesn't work for working people. Week 1 was foundation, week 2 was intermediate, week 3 was expert. Basically the foundation, we kind of covered basic cyber stuff. Basic space, soft skills, systems engineering, and intelligence. I threw in agile learning, agile process. So this week they kind of did their sprint planning. They did a sprint demo. They learned about user stories, right? So, and they played games. For soft skills, I actually had some games for them to kind of do. For week 2, we actually walked through a lot of the actual tasks of an ISSO. And again, we played some games, especially so incident response, we played backdoors and breaches. And then week 3, we do a lot of the CTFs. So for that one, it was a heavy, I mean, kind of on their own, but. So user stories, so anyone here not familiar with Agile? Everybody is? Oh, come on, you guys are all full of it. All right, so the structure of it, you can have AI do this for you too if it helps. But as a space ISSO trainee, I went to successfully launch a communication satellite into orbit using Kerbal Space Program so that I can demonstrate basic understanding of orbital mechanics and satellite deployment procedures. So in Kerbal Space Program, you can do that. It's not that hard. You can actually use a program within it called MechJeb for autopilot, right? You basically can have autopilot do that for you. But in order for that to work, you still have to kind of understand what it's doing and how to make it work. So we created user stories for these, and then that basically drives the students to kind of make their own adventure, right? You have a task. That's your task. What are you gonna do with it? What do you want your rocket to look like? How many times are you gonna blow your rocket up? What happens when you forgot to put fuel? What happens when your staging was out of order, right? I'm not gonna tell you any of that. I'm not gonna give you the step-by-step. That's your instruction, go with it. And what that causes is for the student to be like, okay, you know? And then you provide them a bunch of resources to go and get help if they get stuck. It's not hand-holding, you're not walking them through it, right? And it creates a game. So Kerbal is a game. So once they start having fun with it, now they're like, oh, can I do it faster? How fast can I make it into orbit? Or how much delta V can I have left when I get into orbit? Or how light can my rocket be and still make it into orbit, right? You can start adding challenges to it, depending on what you're trying to get to. So we had different user stories. The CTF one, so I said, as a space ISSO student, I want to complete a space-focused security challenges and demonstrate their relevance in Kerbal Space Program scenarios so that I can develop practical skills in identifying and mitigating space system vulnerabilities. And so what that is you go and you do a CTF challenge, you get the flag. Cool. How would you do that in Kerbal? Right? If I give you a space system in Kerbal, what would that look like when you actually have a satellite or a ground station or a communication network? And when you start thinking about that, it's not that hard. Like there's some interesting stuff that you can do there, and I'll show you a little bit here. But so the 5, we had them do 5 CTF challenges. We recommended Hack the Box, VulnHub. There's a FitSec, Space Heroes. I think that's local. It's somewhere around Florida. Has anyone been to FitSec? Phone, and then Hackasat. And I've done Hackasat in that one. That one's kind of fun. So then I also give them tests. And these were like 2-hour-long tests. A lot of questions, multiple choice, AI created. And I've learned that AI created tests are not that good. They're pretty bad. But I've taken professional tests that I paid a lot of money for, and they were also really bad. So, I'm not convinced that humans are better at this point. Fun fact, I said 200 questions, 1 hour. On the very first test, I misconfigured it. It was 300 questions. So after about 90 minutes, they're like, oh, 200 questions. This was easy. I'm done. Submit. Oh, wait, there's 100 more questions. Uh-oh. So that was fun. Here's a little bit about Uranus. It's the 7th planet. It's a blue-green. You have AI make pictures of it. Question?
Yeah, I was going to ask if those tests were done through Moodle.
Yep.
Like the platform.
Yep. So Moodle gave me metrics that I needed for the research. So, I tell you more about Uranus, but I don't want to be the butt of any jokes. So they had some stock slides in here, but they didn't put Uranus in the stock slide, so you're welcome. It's also full of methane. Go figure. All right, so a quote from Scott Manley. It was going well until it exploded. If anybody has a British accent, that would do better. All right, so one of my students developed a space training tool using Docker, Jupyter Notebooks, and some Kerbal plugins to send remote commands for launch. He launched 5 satellites in an automated control sequence and then injected a cyber attack effect to cause launch failure. That kind of real-world value from cybersecurity training is unique. So basically what he did was he used something called Kerbal RPC, Remote Procedure Call, to connect his Jupyter Notebook into Kerbal. So from there he can send commands to control Kerbal. So he used a whole bunch of he didn't know Docker, so he learned Docker real quick. He didn't know Kerbal, right? So he's learning all of these things, doing Googling, using AI to help him write these scripts. And he gets it to work, and it launches 5 rockets in a row, puts them in orbit, and then on the 5th one, it explodes on launch, right? It's a launch failure. But if you think about it, representative in a space system's life cycle, when is it most volatile? Maybe that launch, when it is sitting on a whole bunch of explosives, right? And it's moving very quickly in a very dense atmosphere with a whole bunch of other parameters it can't really control. So maybe that is important. But oh wait, there's 5 satellites in space now. Well, we learned the other day that there's 100,000 things flying around out there. So maybe out there is more dangerous too. I don't know. So when you actually start looking at risk and trying to calculate these things, and you start thinking cyber attacks, it's not cyber attack on a satellite just hanging out. It is cyber attack within that whole life cycle, right? And then supply chain. So what happens if somebody put a pager in that satellite, in that vehicle? I'm saying the Israeli pagers scenario. It's unlikely a pager will be in a satellite. However, it is possible. So here is kind of a video of him walking through this. Let's see if this will play. I don't have enough hands. So Docker Compose is what he used to create the Jupyter containers. The Steam OS, so Kerbal will run in Steam OS. And then he sets up the network. And he's planning on pushing this to Git, if anybody else is interested. So I think this is very much like the Lomic yesterday, but a little, maybe a lot more stable. And Kerbal is physics-based, so it's not just a game representative, it's actually physics. And you can actually switch Kerbal over to our solar system-based physics. So he's booting Kerbal. He uses Python to launch his planner. I think he speeds some of this up. So on the left is the staging. So if you're not, has anyone played Kerbal? Okay, good.
I was also just saying that I think this is extremely cool. And the Kerbal Space Program game is running through the browser on a different computer or on the same?
So he's using I think he's just running it in Docker. So it's virtualized. Yeah. Yeah, Docker will run, if you have an NVIDIA graphics, it will run games. You'll get graphics pass-through in Linux. Windows is a little less supportive.
That makes me wonder if you have a couple servers set up somewhere so that people wanting to play through this experience just are able to do so.
So Kerbal, people have also built mods for multiplayer, right? So what I'm describing, you know, like it's a single player game, you can kind of build your own CTF stuff into it. You can like open solar panels, you can explode parts, right? So you could do red versus blue style things within Kerbal at this point. And that's what I'm hoping to kind of get this class kind of spun up to. It would be really fun.
That's an extremely cool goal.
Yeah. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, Kerbal got sold and then sold again and sold again, and now it is a dead product. So Kerbal 2 was supposed to come out last year and it fumbled, and then the company just decided to go bankrupt. So the good news is Kerbal 1 is pretty much free, right? So for this class, we use Kerbal EDU, which is a mildly older version of Kerbal, but it still worked fine. So basically, he's using this script, he's running this stuff, and then I think his hostile script starts kicking in here at some point. But when you build out this script concept, you can, any kind of hostile script, you just have to figure out how to link it into Kerbal, right? And then the other thing you could do is map this out to actual hardware, or map this out to an RF environment. So from Kerbal, I can actually connect satellites to, say, a hack RF and create an RF path into the game, which is interesting and confusing and complex, exciting, right? So the examples he had is, let's see, his hostile script monitoring a non-target, blah, blah, blah. And then he had a script that detected a target and waits to execute the command. And then his script jettisoned a portion of the lower stage ahead of schedule, forcing MacJeb to extend the burn and expend more delta V. So for that kind of CTF, it's I would do something like, how would you prevent this attack in order to save delta V, you know, in a certain amount of time? You have like 45 seconds to defend this attack or something, right? But like an entire playground that you can now apply cyber knowledge and skills and experience to. All right, so for qualitative, quantitative feedback, we asked a bunch of questions. We did some surveys at the end. The ones I liked was, I would like to still play games, training games like this, even if I'm not being graded or paid. Everybody pretty much supported that. Did you have a significant learning experience? So that is like when you were a kid and you rode a bike for the first time. Everybody remembers that. It's a joyous experience, right? You don't forget it. When you can tie learning to those, you know it for a very long time. You know it well. So if your training is like meh, it's not going to stick. If you can get a significant learning experience, that's going to stick with you for the rest of your life, right? So that's kind of what we wanted. And everybody seemed to have one, which is good. And then everybody improved on some of those other ones. Some of the feedback I got is, so I asked what was the most valuable aspect. The integration of role examples and fundamentals allowed me to shape more advanced concepts into my pre-existing mental models, accelerating my learning, right? Kind of learn faster. What part of this course was most helpful to your learning? Opening up in non-traditional forms of learning enabled students who do not benefit from traditional lecture-based. Like I just gave a lecture for an hour. You guys are like, shut up already. Any other comments? I've learned more in the last few weeks, months with project and game-oriented learning than in years of traditional learning methods attempting to study cybersecurity and space topics via lecture. Right? When somebody says that, like that's good. That's good stuff. I've never said that with my annual cybersecurity awareness training. So in conclusion, our test scores, everybody on average jumped up. And I didn't have a lot of students. I had 10 students, only 5 completed the class, so I had a pretty horrible attrition rate. But they all survived. Nobody died. The inverted security risk taxonomy, I think, is pretty good stuff. I'd like to explore that more. And then the KSTs, expanding that from NICE, I think, is going to be an important task. And I think it's a community task, not just a Jordan says so kind of task. And then I have a QR code. So we're going to be so last year was the prototype course. This year we're going to start hosting more Space ISSO classes. So if you're interested, or if you know somebody who would be interested, I have a QR code. You can sign up. Give me your email. I will provide you communication at some point. Probably sign you up for that Flat Earth app too while I'm at it. I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that.